the ultimate guide to avoiding common language learning mistakes. In this podcast episode, we break down the mistakes every language learner makes and show you exactly how to fix them.
Hello and welcome to Simple Spoken English channel. We're diving deep today into common language learning mistakes. Even if you think you're doing everything right.
It's really fascinating how our brains can, sometimes our instincts lead us astray, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Translation traps, pronunciation myths, all that sneaky stuff. Even how our native language can sabotage our progress. We're covering it all to help you learn more effectively.
You can think of it as a shortcut, really, to busting those pesky language learning myths and uncovering the secrets to, faster progress.
All right, let's jump right in. Mistake number 1, the translation trap. We've all been there, right? Trying to speak a new language. But our brain, it's stuck in translation mode.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit square blocks into round holes, You end up with this, jumbled mess instead of a smooth flow. Imagine, you're in Spain, feeling a little warm, and you just blurt out, estoy caliente, thinking you've just said, I'm hot.
Oh.
But to your surprise, everyone starts giggling. You see, estoy caliente. It doesn't actually mean you're feeling the heat. It means you're, feeling amorous, let's just say.
Oh my gosh.
It's a classic example of, the translation trap.
That's hilarious and a little embarrassing. I can totally see myself making that mistake. So how do we avoid falling into this trap?
It's all about mindset, really. Shifting your mindset from translating to thinking directly in the new language. So instead of mentally, converting every word, you're imagining a direct link between the new word and its meaning. It's like building a bridge straight to understanding.
That makes sense. But it sounds easier said than done. Any tips on how to actually do that?
Absolutely. One powerful technique is immersion. Surround yourself with authentic content, movies, music, books. Even if you don't understand everything at first, that constant exposure is key. It helps your brain start to make those direct connections.
That's a great tip. I'm already feeling more motivated to switch up my learning routine. So what's the next mistake we should be aware of?
Let's talk about the pursuit of perfect pronunciation. Mistake number 2. So many learners, they get hung up on achieving this flawless, native-like accent. But here's the secret. There's no such thing.
Wait, really? But what about all those language learning programs that promise perfect pronunciation?
I hate to break it to you, but they're selling you a myth. The truth is, even native speakers have different accents and ways of speaking, right? I mean, think about it. English is spoken all over the world. Countless regional variations, and each one has its own unique charm.
That's so true. I never thought about it that way. But doesn't pronunciation matter at all?
Of course it matters. But clarity and comprehensibility, those are far more important than, sounding exactly like a native speaker. Your goal should be to be understood, not to erase your own unique voice, right?
So how do we find that balance between clear pronunciation and embracing our own accents?
It's all about focusing on the key elements that really impact understanding. Stress and intonation. Think of them as the musical cues of language, the rise and fall of your voice, the emphasis on certain syllables. These can completely change the meaning of a phrase.
You mean like how the same word can sound like a question or a statement, depending on how you say it?
Exactly. Mastering stress and intonation is like unlocking a secret code to sounding natural and fluent. You're capturing the rhythm, the flow of the language.
This is making me realize how much I've been focusing on the wrong things. I need to shift my attention from mimicking a perfect accent to, understanding the music of the language.
And remember, don't get so hung up on speaking speed that you sacrifice clarity, It's much better to speak slowly and clearly than to rush through words and end up being misunderstood.
This is all such great advice. I'm already feeling more confident about speaking up without worrying about, sounding perfect. Now, what about grammar? Should we be obsessing over every rule?
That brings us to mistake number 3, the grammar obsession. Many learners, they get so bogged down by the complexities of grammar rules, striving for perfection in every sentence. But here's the surprising truth. Sometimes breaking the rules can actually make you sound more natural.
Hold on. Are you saying we shouldn't worry about grammar at all?
Not exactly. Grammar is important. It provides the framework for communication. But it's a tool, not a tyrant, right? Sometimes native speakers themselves bend the rules to sound more casual, more fluent. Think about it. Do you always use perfect grammar when you're chatting with friends?
Definitely not. especially when I'm excited or trying to tell a story.
Exactly. And that's the point. Language is a living, breathing thing. It's constantly evolving, adapting to the way people actually use it.
So how do we know when it's okay to bend the rules and when we need to stick to proper grammar?
It's all about context and understanding the nuances of the language you're learning. Pay attention to how native speakers use grammar in everyday conversation. And don't be afraid to experiment.
This is really liberating to hear. It's like getting permission to be imperfect and still be understood.
Exactly. And remember, your native language can sometimes sabotage your grammar in the new language, you know? Your brain might try to apply familiar patterns that don't quite fit. So be mindful of those potential pitfalls.
This is all such valuable information. I'm starting to see language learning in a whole new light. Now, what about vocabulary? I've always thought that knowing more words is the key to fluency.
That's a common misconception, which leads us to mistake number 4, vocabulary hoarding. A lot of learners believe that accumulating a vast vocabulary is the path to fluency, but it's not that simple.
So you say we shouldn't bother learning new words?
Not at all, but it's about quality over quantity, you know? Focus on mastering high-frequency words, the words that are used most often in everyday conversation, instead of trying to memorize, every word in the dictionary.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like learning the essential tools first, before trying to build a whole toolbox.
Exactly. And another crucial point is learning words in context. Simply memorizing word lists or using flashcards without understanding their application in real-life situations, that won't make you fluent.
So it's not just about knowing the definition of a word. It's about understanding how to actually use it.
Precisely. Think about it. You could memorize a whole list of cooking terms, but that wouldn't make you a chef, would it? You need to understand how those terms actually relate to the process of cooking.
That's a great analogy. So how do we make sure we're learning vocabulary in a way that actually sticks?
Immerse yourself in the language. Read books, watch movies, listen to music, and pay attention. Pay attention to how words are used in different situations. The more you encounter a word in context, the better you'll understand its nuances and the better you'll be able to use it yourself.
This is really eye-opening. I'm realizing I've been making a lot of these vocabulary mistakes. I need to rethink my approach and focus on quality over quantity.
And remember the difference between passive and active vocabulary. Passive vocabulary is, what you understand when you hear or read it. Active vocabulary is what you can actually use when you're speaking or writing.
So how do we bridge the gap between passive and active vocabulary?
Practice, practice, practice. Use the words you learn in conversations. Write sentences, write stories with them. The more you actively use new words, the stronger they'll become in your memory.
This is all making so much sense. I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's not just about memorizing rules and words. It's about understanding how the language works and actively using it.
Exactly. And that brings us to another common pitfall, mistake number 5, the silent observer syndrome. Many learners fall into this trap of passive learning, consuming lots of content, but shying away from actually speaking.
I can definitely relate to that. I used to spend hours watching movies and listening to music in my target language, but I was always too nervous to actually speak.
It's a common fear, but the truth is, speaking is crucial for progress. No matter how much you listen or read, you won't become fluent without actually using the language,
So how do we overcome that fear of speaking and break free from the silent observer syndrome?
Create a safe space. Create a safe and supportive environment for yourself. Find a language partner. Join an online community, or even, talk to yourself. The key is to get those words out there, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
But what if I make a fool of myself?
Remember, everyone makes mistakes. It's part of the learning process. Native speakers are generally very understanding, especially when they can see that you're making an effort.
That's reassuring to hear. I need to remind myself that making mistakes it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of progress.
Exactly. View mistakes as valuable feedback. They help you identify those areas where you need to improve.
This has been such an insightful conversation so far. I'm already feeling more confident and motivated to approach language learning in a more effective way.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to explore. We'll dive into some more common mistakes and how to avoid them in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait to hear what else you have to share. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into language learning mistakes. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and experiences.
Welcome back to our deep dive into language learning mistakes, where we're uncovering those hidden pitfalls that might be holding you back from fluency.
I'm so excited to continue this conversation and learn more about, how to optimize my learning strategies.
Okay, let's talk about memory and learning processes, specifically mistake number 6. Many learners approach language learning with study habits that actually hinder their progress.
It's like using the wrong tools for the job. You might be putting in the effort, but not getting the results you want.
Exactly. And one common mistake is limiting yourself to just one learning style, whether it's visual, auditory, or kinesthetic.
Yeah, for me, I'm a visual learner. I love using flashcards, diagrams, all that. But I've never really thought about incorporating other learning styles.
Well, think of it this way. Your brain is a muscle. And just like any muscle, it benefits from a variety of exercises, Incorporating different learning styles, it's like cross-training for your brain.
Okay, so how do we actually mix up our learning styles in a practical way?
If you're a visual learner, try adding some audio materials to your routine, like podcasts, music, things like that. If you're more of an auditory learner, incorporate some visual aids, charts, mind maps, whatever works for you. And for those kinesthetic learners, find ways to move and interact with the language, like role-playing or using gestures.
This is making me realize how much I've been neglecting certain parts of my brain.
Yeah.
I need to start giving it a full workout.
And remember, cramming is a recipe for forgetting. It might help you pass a test, but it won't lead to long-term retention.
I've definitely been guilty of cramming before, like the night before a test, only to forget everything a week later.
It's like building a house of cards on a shaky foundation, right? It might look impressive for a moment, but it's bound to collapse.
So how do we build a solid foundation for language learning, one that will stand the test of time?
Spaced repetition is key. Instead of cramming information into your brain all at once, review material at increasing intervals. This gives your brain time to process, to consolidate the information, and that leads to stronger memories.
It's like watering a plant regularly. Instead of drowning it all at once, you give it time to absorb the nutrients and grow strong roots.
Exactly. And when it comes to study sessions, short, focused bursts are more effective than long, unfocused ones. Your brain has a limited attention span, and trying to absorb too much information at once can lead to mental fatigue.
So instead of spending hours trying to cram everything in, it's better to break down your study time into manageable chunks with clear objectives.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder. Quality over quantity, remember.
This is all such valuable advice. I'm starting to see how even small changes to my study habits can make a big difference.
And that brings us to mistake number 7, resource management. Many learners get overwhelmed by the sheer volume of language learning resources that are out there these days.
It's like trying to drink from a fire hose. Yeah. There's so much information coming at you, you don't even know where to start.
One common mistake is falling into the trap of thinking that expensive resources are always better.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that before, thinking, the more I spend, the better the results will be.
But the truth is, there are plenty of fantastic free resources available online that are just as effective, if not more so, than paid courses.
So it's not about how much you spend, it's about finding the right resources for your needs, your learning style.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment with different resources until you find what works best for you.
And speaking of resources, technology can be both a blessing and a curse in language learning, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. Apps and websites can be incredibly helpful tools, but it's important to use them mindfully and avoid getting distracted.
It's so easy to get sucked into the endless scroll of social media or fall down a rabbit hole of online articles.
Right. So set clear boundaries for your tech use, especially during study time. Make sure it's actually enhancing your learning rather than hindering it.
I need to start setting some digital boundaries for myself. My phone is a major distraction during study time.
Think of it this way. Technology is a tool, just like a hammer or a screwdriver. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a screw, would you?
That's a great analogy. I need to use technology strategically and not let it control me.
And that brings us to mistake number 8, social learning mistakes. Interacting with others in your target language is essential for developing fluency and confidence.
I completely agree. There's nothing quite like, having a real conversation to put your skills to the test.
Right. But there are some common mistakes people make that can actually hinder their progress in social learning situations.
Okay, so what are some social learning pitfalls we should be aware of?
One very common one is being afraid to make mistakes. It's natural to feel nervous or self-conscious when you're speaking a new language, but remember that making mistakes is an integral part of learning.
It's like learning to ride a bike, right? You're bound to fall a few times before you get the hang of it.
Exactly. And native speakers are generally very forgiving, especially when they see that you're making an effort.
I need to remind myself of that. I tend to get too hung up on sounding perfect, which just makes me more nervous.
Remember, fluency is not about perfection. It's about communication.
Another mistake I've made is relying too heavily on my language partner to lead the conversation.
Right. It's important to take ownership of your learning and actively participate in those conversations.
And if you find yourself constantly switching back to English, gently remind your partner that you want to practice speaking the target language.
Absolutely. And it's helpful to establish clear expectations right from the beginning and create an environment where both parties feel comfortable practicing.
And while we're on the topic of social learning, let's talk about cultural faux pas.
Ah, yes. These are inevitable, really, when you're learning a new language and culture. But instead of seeing them as embarrassing blunders, try to embrace them as valuable learning opportunities.
I once accidentally told a French waiter that I was pregnant when I meant to say I was full. It was mortifying. But I learned a valuable lesson about false cognates.
Right. Cultural differences, they can sometimes lead to misunderstandings, but they also offer a chance to gain deeper insights into the culture you're learning about.
It's all part of the adventure of language learning, isn't it? Embracing the unexpected, learning from our mistakes.
Exactly. And that brings us to mistake number 9, self-assessment mistakes.
I think it's important to, regularly evaluate our progress, but it's also really easy to get caught up in self-doubt.
That's true. And one common mistake is relying solely on our feelings to gauge how well we're doing.
Sometimes I feel like I'm making no progress at all, even though I'm putting in the effort.
Right. Our feelings, they can be subjective and sometimes even misleading. It's important to focus on more objective measures of improvement.
So instead of relying on how we feel, we should look for concrete evidence of our progress.
Exactly. Track things like, the number of words you've learned, the complexity of sentences you can construct, and your ability to actually understand and engage in conversations.
Those are all measurable metrics that can give us a more accurate picture of our progress.
And another mistake is comparing ourselves to other learners.
Yeah, it's so easy to get discouraged when you see other people who seem to be learning much faster than you.
Remember, everyone learns at their own pace. And everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, right?
So instead of getting caught up in the comparison game, we should just focus on our own journey and celebrate our individual achievements.
Exactly. Focus on the progress you've made since you started and celebrate every milestone along the way.
This is such a powerful reminder. I need to stop comparing myself to others and focus on my own unique path.
And that brings us to mistake number 10, study environment mistakes. The space where you choose to study, it can have a significant impact on your focus, your motivation, and ultimately your progress.
I've never really thought about how my study environment might be affecting my learning.
One common mistake is neglecting to create a dedicated study space, one that's actually free from distractions.
Yeah. I usually study at my kitchen table, which is also where my family eats meals and my kids do their homework. It's not exactly a peaceful sanctuary.
Distractions, they can really derail your focus and hinder your ability to retain information.
So it's not just about finding a quiet spot. It's about creating a space that's actually conducive to learning.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If you were an athlete, you wouldn't train in a cluttered and chaotic environment, right? You'd want a space that's designed for optimal performance.
That's a great analogy. I need to start treating my study space with the same respect I would treat like a gym or a training ground.
And don't underestimate the power of a well-organized study space.
I know what you mean. Clutter and disorganization, It just leads to mental fatigue, and it makes it so much harder to concentrate.
Exactly. Keep your study area tidy and arrange your materials in a way that promotes focus and efficiency.
It's like having a clean and organized toolbox, right? It's much easier to find the right tool for the job when everything is in its place.
Another common mistake is trying to force yourself to study at times when your energy levels are low.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely a night owl. But I often try to force myself to study in the mornings when I'm still half asleep.
We all have different peak performance times. Some people are more alert in the mornings, while others, they thrive in the evenings.
So they're trying to swim against the current, You'll expend a lot of energy, but you won't get very far.
Exactly. So experiment with different study times and find what works best for you.
Pay attention to your body's natural rhythms and schedule your study sessions accordingly.
And speaking of schedules, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you need long, uninterrupted blocks of time to study effectively.
Oh, I always feel like I need to carve out like hours of uninterrupted time to make any progress. But that's not always realistic, is it?
Right. And short, focused study sessions can be just as productive, if not more so.
It's like doing interval training. You alternate between bursts of intense activity and short periods of rest.
Exactly. So leverage those micro-learning moments throughout your day, such as listening to podcasts during your commute or reviewing flashcards while you're waiting in line.
I never thought about it that way, but those little pockets of time, they can really add up.
The key is to be consistent and integrate language learning into your daily routine.
It's about making language learning a habit, not a chore.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final mistake for this episode. Mistake number 11, motivation and psychology mistakes.
I think motivation is one of the biggest challenges for language learners. It's so easy to get discouraged, especially when progress feels slow.
Right. Motivation is often seen as the key to success in language learning, but it can be a fickle friend.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm super motivated to study, and other days I just can't seem to get started.
That's perfectly normal. Motivation, it ebbs and flows, but the key is to not rely on it solely,
So what should we do instead? Force ourselves to study even when we don't feel like it.
Not necessarily. It's about understanding how motivation works and creating systems that actually support our learning, even when we're not feeling particularly inspired.
Okay, can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say your goal is to study for 30 minutes every day, right? Instead of waiting until you feel motivated, schedule a specific time in your day for studying and treat it like an important appointment.
So even if I'm not feeling motivated, I should just sit down and start studying anyway.
Exactly. And you might be surprised to find that once you get started, your motivation will naturally kick in.
It's like tricking your brain into thinking you want to study.
Precisely. And another important aspect of motivation is setting realistic goals.
I'm definitely guilty of setting unrealistic goals. I always want to learn everything as quickly as possible.
Right. It's a common mistake. We get caught up in the excitement of learning a new language and set ourselves up for disappointment.
So how do we set realistic goals?
Start by breaking down your larger goal into smaller, more manageable steps. For example, instead of aiming to become fluent in a year, set a goal to learn, say, 50 new words each week.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
It's less overwhelming and it's easier to track progress.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate your achievements, no matter how small they may seem.
Celebrating small wins, it helps to, maintain motivation and momentum.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that you're making progress and moving towards your goal.
And speaking of progress, one mistake I often make is comparing myself to other learners.
The comparison trap. It's a dangerous one. It can lead to feelings of inadequacy and discouragement.
Especially when you see other people who just seem to be learning much faster than you.
It's important to remember that everyone learns at their own pace. And everyone has their own unique strengths and weaknesses, right?
So instead of comparing yourself to others, just focus on your own progress and celebrate your individual achievements.
Exactly. And remember that language learning is a journey, not a race. Enjoy the process and focus on the joy of discovering a new language.
This has been such an enlightening conversation. I'm feeling so much more equipped to tackle my language learning journey with confidence and a positive mindset.
We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, but the key takeaway is that by understanding these common mistakes and implementing the strategies we've discussed, you can overcome obstacles and accelerate your progress.
I can't wait to put all this advice into practice and see the results in my own language learning journey.
And remember, language learning is a lifelong journey. There's always something new to discover and explore.
Stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll wrap up our discussion and share some final thoughts on the joys and rewards of language learning. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into common language learning mistakes. I'm feeling so inspired after our previous conversations and ready to embrace those challenges ahead.
That's the spirit. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. It's about consistency, perseverance, and, well, most importantly, enjoying the journey.
Yeah, speaking of enjoying the journey, one thing that's really struck me throughout this deep dive is the importance of mindset and motivation.
Absolutely. Your attitude and beliefs about language learning, they can really either help or hinder your progress.
I used to think that some people are just like naturally gifted at languages while others struggle, but now I realize that anyone can learn a language with the right approach.
Exactly. It's not about talent. It's about strategy and effort.
So how do we cultivate a growth mindset and stay motivated even when the going gets tough?
One powerful technique is to focus on the intrinsic rewards of language learning.
You mean like the joy of discovering a new language, connecting with other cultures, and, expanding our horizons?
Precisely. When you're motivated by a genuine love of learning, the challenges become less daunting, and the progress, it becomes more rewarding.
It's like climbing a mountain, right? The journey's arduous, but the view from the top, breathtaking.
And another helpful strategy is to surround yourself with a supportive community of language learners.
Yeah, having people who understand the challenges and celebrate those victories, that can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. It's like having a team of cheerleaders cheering you on every step of the way.
And let's not forget the importance of self-care.
Right. Learning a new language can be mentally and emotionally demanding, so it's crucial to prioritize your well-being.
It's like running a marathon. You need to fuel your body, rest when you need to, and listen to your inner voice.
Exactly. And remember to celebrate your successes, no matter how small they may seem.
Every milestone is a testament to your hard work and dedication.
It's like planting a seed and watching it grow into a beautiful flower. It takes time, patience, and nurturing.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I'm feeling so much more, confident and equipped to tackle my language learning goals.
Remember the key takeaways. Embrace mistakes as opportunities for growth, focus on consistency and quality over quantity, and never, never lose sight of the joy of learning.
And most importantly, believe in yourself. You have the power to achieve fluency.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Like this video and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and experiences.
We love hearing from our viewers and creating this community of language enthusiasts.
And if you know someone who's, struggling with language learning, share this video with them. It might just be the inspiration they need.
Thank you for joining us on Simple Spoken English channel. And until next time, happy learning.